The English Channel was a graveyard that morning. Lieutenant James Hartley stood on the bow of the landing craft, salt spray stinging his face, watching the coastline of Normandy emerge through the pre-dawn mist like a dark promise. June 7, 1944, D-Day +1. The first wave had already bled into those beaches. Now it was their turn. But Hartley wasn't thinking about the Germans in the pillboxes or the MG-42s waiting in the dunes. He was thinking about what lay beneath the sand. Mines. Thousands of them. The S-mines the Germans called bouncing Bettys, spring-loaded death that leaped to waist height before detonating, shredding everything within 10 meters. The Teller mines, massive anti-tank discs buried just beneath the surface, enough explosive to flip a Sherman tank like a toy. The shoe mines, wooden boxes filled with TNT, invisible to metal detectors, designed to blow a man's foot clean off. Hartley had studied them all. He'd memorized their pressure tolerances, their trigger mechanisms, their placement patterns. Because 3 months ago, in a rain-soaked briefing room in Portsmouth, a man from British intelligence had handed him something that wasn't supposed to exist. A blueprint. A German blueprint. Stabsfeldwebel Klaus Zimmermann had been his name, a Wehrmacht combat engineer captured near Monte Cassino. Wounded, delirious from infection, he'd been evacuated to a British field hospital where a German-speaking nurse had sat with him during his fever dreams. And in those fevered nights, Zimmermann had talked. About home. About his wife in Dresden. About the minefield patterns he'd laid across northern France. The intelligence officer, a quiet man named Pemberton with permanent ink stains on his fingers, had spent 6 weeks cross-referencing Zimmermann's ramblings with aerial reconnaissance photographs and captured German engineering manuals. What emerged was a map. Not a complete map, the Germans weren't fools, but a pattern. A compass of death. The Germans, Pemberton had explained, were methodical. They laid their minefields in geometric patterns based on compass bearings. Northeast sectors favored anti-personnel mines in staggered rows. Southeast sectors concentrated anti-tank mines along probable vehicle approaches. The patterns varied by region, by engineer company, by the personality of the commanding officer, but they followed rules. Hidden rules. Rules that Zimmermann had helped them decode. Hartley had been chosen because of his background. Before the war, he'd been a surveyor for a mining company in Pennsylvania. He understood topography, angles, magnetic declination. He could read terrain like other men read newspapers. And he could navigate by compass in conditions that would leave other men hopelessly lost. They'd given him a modified compass, a brass Brunton pocket transit, standard surveyor's equipment, but with special markings etched along the bezel. Tiny notches at specific degree readings, 37, 82, 143, 209, 318. Meaningless to anyone who didn't know the code. To Hartley, they were lifelines. Each notch corresponded to a sector designation from Zimmermann's blueprint. Each sector had a predicted mine density, a predicted pattern. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed. But it was better than nothing. The landing craft's ramp dropped with a metallic crash. Cold water surged around Hartley's boots as he stepped off into waist-deep surf. Behind him, 23 engineers from the 299th Combat Engineer Battalion followed. They carried mine detectors, marking flags, and wire cutters. Their job was to clear a path from the beach to the coastal road, a path that tanks and trucks and men could follow without being blown to pieces. Standard doctrine called for systematic sweeping, metal detectors swinging in slow arcs, inch by inch, marking every contact. Safe, methodical, and slow. So slow that the Germans in the remaining defensive positions would have hours to call down artillery, to reorganize, to kill. Hartley had different orders. Orders that came from Pemberton himself, signed by officers whose names were redacted from the paperwork. Use the blueprint. Trust the pattern. Clear the beach in 60 minutes, not 6 hours. His men didn't know about the blueprint. They knew Hartley had a reputation for uncanny instincts, for seeming to know where mines were without the detector telling him. They called him Sixth Sense, behind his back. They followed him because he'd kept them alive through training, through England, through the bocage hedgerows they'd cleared yesterday. They didn't know he was gambling with their lives based on the fever dreams of a dying German engineer. The beach was chaos. Abandoned equipment from yesterday's landing lay scattered across the sand. A burned-out jeep, coils of wire, a helmet with a hole punched through the crown. Bodies had been cleared, but the smell of cordite and death still hung heavy. Incoming mortar fire whistled overhead at irregular intervals, impacting in the water or further down the beach. The Germans were blind firing, harassment barrages meant to slow the build-up. Hartley pulled out his compass, holding it level, waiting for the needle to settle. The beach ran roughly northeast-southwest. According to the blueprint, this section, designated Madeline by the Germans, should be a northeast sector. That meant anti-personnel mines in staggered rows, with heavier concentrations near the dune line where infantry would naturally seek cover. "Sergeant Willis," Hartley called over the noise. Staff Sergeant Richard Willis, a thick-shouldered man from Georgia, splashed up beside him. "Sir, we're not sweeping the whole beach. We're cutting a corridor, 20 meters wide. Follow my lead exactly." Willis's eyes narrowed. "Sir, that's an order, Sergeant." Willis hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Hartley checked the compass again, turned to 37 degrees, the first notch, and started walking. Not carefully, not tentatively, walking at a normal pace, as if he were strolling through a park. Behind him, he heard Willis suck in a breath. The sand beneath Hartley's boots was firm, packed down by yesterday's tide. Every step was an act of faith. Every step could be his last. The S-mines were pressure-activated at 8 kilograms, about 18 pounds. Hartley weighed 170. Plenty. But the pattern said this angle should be clear. Zimmerman's voice, filtered through Pemberton's notes, "We placed the bouncing Bettys in the kill zones, not the approach vectors. Let them walk forward. Let them feel safe. Then cut them down where they mass. 10 meters. 20. 30. Nothing." Hartley's heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. He adjusted to 82 degrees, angling toward the dune line. According to the blueprint, there should be a gap here, a maintenance corridor the Germans used to service the fortifications without triggering their own mines. 40 meters. 50. Behind him, Willis was directing the others, laying white engineering tape to mark the cleared corridor. Hartley could feel their eyes on his back, could sense their tension. One of the younger engineers, a kid from Ohio named Patterson, was whispering prayers under his breath. 60 meters. They were at the dune line now, where the beach sloped upward into scrub grass and sand dunes. This was where the pattern said the density would increase. This was where Hartley had to trust the blueprint completely. He checked the compass. Adjusted to 143 degrees. 3 steps forward, then a diagonal shift to the left. 2 more steps. Then straight ahead for 5 meters. The mine detector operator behind him, Corporal Hayes, was getting nervous. "Lieutenant, I'm not picking up any." Hayes's foot came down on disturbed sand. There was a soft click, mechanical and precise, like a watch spring releasing. Time stopped. Hayes froze, his eyes going wide. Hartley turned, saw the terror on the corporal's face, saw the slight depression in the sand where Hayes's boot had settled. An S-mine. He'd found one. "Don't move," Hartley said, his voice calm. "Don't shift your weight. Don't breathe hard." The S-mine had 2 triggers. The pressure trigger activated the primer charge, which launched the mine upward on a steel cable about 1 meter high. Then, after a half-second delay, the main charge detonated. But the pressure trigger had a release mechanism. If you stepped on it and held your weight steady, it wouldn't fire. If you lifted your foot, even slightly, the release would trigger the launch sequence. Hayes was standing on a loaded bomb, and if he moved, everyone within 10 meters would die. Hartley dropped to his knees beside Hayes, moving slowly, deliberately. The corporal was shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. "Hayes, look at me." Hartley's voice was firm but not harsh. "Look at my eyes." Hayes's gaze locked onto Hartley's. Tears were streaming down the young man's face. "You're going to be fine," Hartley said. "We train for this. You remember the drill." I can't." Hayes's voice was a whisper. "You can. And you will. Because these men need you. Now, on my count, I'm going to place a sandbag next to your foot. When I say, 'shift,' you're going to transfer your weight onto your other foot, slowly, while I slide the sandbag under your boot. The weight transfer has to be gradual. If the pressure drops suddenly, the release triggers. Understand?" Hayes nodded, not trusting his voice. Willis was already moving, pulling sandbags from the equipment packs. Hartley took one, positioned it carefully beside Hayes's foot. The S-mine was buried about 6 inches down. The pressure plate was probably a metal disc about 4 inches across. If Hartley could maintain pressure while substituting the sandbag for Hayes's foot. "Ready?" Hartley asked. "Ready," Hayes whispered. "Shift." Slowly. Hayes began to transfer his weight, millimeter by millimeter. Hartley slid the sandbag in, feeling the resistance, judging the pressure. Too fast and the release would trigger. Too slow and Hayes's leg would give out from the strain of holding the awkward position. Sweat dripped down Hartley's forehead despite the cool morning air. Around them, the rest of the squad had frozen, watching. Another mortar round whistled overhead, impacting somewhere down the beach. "Almost there," Hartley said. "Keep going." The sandbag settled into place. Hayes's foot lifted clear. Nothing happened. Hayes stumbled backward, and Willis caught him before he collapsed. The corporal was sobbing now, huge gasping sobs of relief and terror. "Mark it," Hartley said to Willis. "Red flag. We'll deal with it on the way back." Willis planted a red marker flag beside the S-mine. "Lieutenant, if there's one here, there's got to be more. Maybe we should." "We keep moving," Hartley said. "But we adjust the pattern." He pulled out the compass again, checking his position. Hayes had strayed from the cleared corridor, angling toward what looked like easier terrain. The blueprint had predicted mines in this sector, but Hayes had found one outside the expected zone. Either Zimmerman's information was incomplete, or this section had been mined by a different engineer unit. Hartley closed his eyes, visualizing the pattern. The S-mine had been positioned to guard the approach to a concrete pillbox partially buried in the dunes ahead. The Germans would have placed mines to funnel attackers into kill zones covered by machine guns. Which meant... He opened his eyes, checked the compass, and turned to a bearing of 209 degrees. "This way," he said. "Single file. Step exactly where I step." They moved forward in a line, 23 men following one man's footsteps like a deadly game of follow the leader. Hartley's mind raced, recalculating the pattern, comparing the terrain to the blueprint. The pillbox was the key. The Germans had been defending the pillbox, which meant the mine density would be highest directly in front of it, lighter on the flanks. He angled left, moving parallel to the pillbox instead of toward it. The going was slower now, more cautious. Every few steps, Hartley would pause, check the compass, scan the ground for telltales, disturbed sand, wire fragments, the slight discoloration that might indicate buried metal. The blueprint gave him general patterns, but it couldn't account for every mine. His surveyor's eye had to fill in the gaps. Behind him, Patterson, the kid from Ohio, was still muttering prayers. Willis was counting steps, memorizing the path for the return trip. Hayes had recovered enough to carry his mine detector again, though his hands were still shaking. They reached the edge of the dunes without triggering another mine. From here, Hartley could see inland, a patchwork of hedgerows and farm fields, the infamous bocage country that had already cost the Allies thousands of casualties. Somewhere out there, German artillery observers were watching, waiting to call down fire on any concentration of troops. But between the dunes and the nearest hedgerow was 200 meters of open ground. And according to the blueprint, this section, designated Paulette, was a southeast sector. Anti-tank mines along probable vehicle routes. Hartley pulled out the modified compass, studying the etchings. The 318-degree notch corresponded to anti-tank patterns. Teller mines, mostly. Massive things, 10 kilograms of TNT and explosive, designed to destroy tanks. A man could walk right over a Teller mine without triggering it. The pressure plate required about 200 pounds of force. But a jeep, a truck, a tank. "Listen up," Hartley said, gathering his squad. "We're going to clear a vehicle path. But we're not sweeping every meter. We're going to use the German logic against them." He sketched in the sand with a stick, drawing the pattern. The Germans place anti-tank mines in clusters along the most obvious vehicle routes. They want to create choke points, force armor into kill zones. But they also need to move their own vehicles. So they create gaps, unmarked corridors they can use for resupply and evacuation. Willis studied the sketch. "How do we find the corridors?" "Terrain and geometry," Hartley said. "Look at this field. There's a natural rise running from here to that hedgerow. Perfect hull-down position for a Panther or a PaK-40 anti-tank gun. The Germans would want to be able to withdraw along that rise without hitting their own mines. Which means—" He drew a line in the sand, angling from their position toward the rise. "We walk the high ground. We mark the route. And we do it fast before Jerry starts dropping shells on us." It was a gamble. Everything about this mission was a gamble. But Hartley had read Zimmermann's words, had studied the German engineer's thought process, had internalized the logic of the Wehrmacht's mine warfare doctrine. The Germans were methodical, yes, but they were also pragmatic. They laid mines to kill the enemy, but they also needed to survive their own defenses. The blueprint was more than just a map. It was a window into the German mind. They moved out across the open ground, Hartley leading, compass in hand. The morning sun was higher now, burning off the mist, exposing them to any observer with binoculars. Hartley moved at a steady jog, not running. Running would attract artillery, but not crawling either. 50 meters. 100. 150. Still nothing. Behind him, the engineers were spreading out slightly, marking the corridor with white tape. If Hartley was right, this would become a main supply route within hours. Trucks, ambulances, ammunition carriers, all flowing forward to support the push inland. If he was wrong, the first vehicle would turn into a fireball, and the route would be closed for hours while engineers swept it properly. 175 meters. Patterson's mine detector started beeping. "Contact." Patterson called. "I've got metal, big signature." Hartley stopped, moved back to Patterson's position. The detector was screaming now, the tone high and urgent. Patterson knelt, brushed away sand, and there it was, the dark green paint of a Teller mine, about 6 inches down. "Right where it should be," Hartley said quietly. Willis looked at him sharply. "Sir." "Mark it, flag it, and keep moving on the same bearing." They flagged the Teller mine with a red marker and continued. 200 meters. They'd reached the hedgerow. Hartley turned, looking back at the beach. From here, he could see the entire corridor they'd cleared, a thin white line of engineering tape stretching from the waterline to the inland fields. It had taken them 43 minutes. Standard sweeping would have taken 6 hours, maybe more. But they weren't done yet. Willis, take half the squad and sweep the perimeter. I want to know what's on either side of our corridor. And I want it done in the next 30 minutes. Willis hesitated. Lieutenant, if we spread out off the marked path. I know the risks, Sergeant. But we need to know if the pattern holds. If it does, we can use this technique across the entire sector. If it doesn't... Hartley didn't finish the sentence. Willis nodded grimly. Yes, sir. He selected 10 men and began organizing them into sweep teams. Hartley watched them go, then turned his attention to the hedgerow. These earthen walls, topped with thick vegetation, were nightmares for attackers. Perfect defensive positions, nearly impossible to see through, deadly to assault. And the Germans had been in Normandy for 4 years. They'd had plenty of time to fortify. Hartley moved along the hedgerow, studying it with a surveyor's eye. There, a gap, partially hidden by brush. A farm gate, probably, used by the local farmers before the war. And beside the gate, he knelt, brushing aside leaves and grass. There, a wire, thin as fishing line, strung across the gap at ankle height. He followed the wire with his eyes, saw where it led, into the hedgerow, to a cluster of potato masher grenades tied together with more wire. A booby trap. Simple, effective, deadly. Step through the gap, catch the wire, pull the pins on the grenades. The kind of trap that killed soldiers every single day. But also the kind of trap that confirmed something important. The Germans had been here. They'd defended this position, which meant the minefield patterns should match the blueprint. Willis returned 20 minutes later, his face grim. Lieutenant, we found 15 more mines. S-mines and tellers. All of them exactly where you said they'd be. Hartley felt a cold weight settle in his chest. It wasn't relief. It was responsibility. The blueprint worked, which meant he was going to have to keep using it. Keep gambling. Keep trusting the fever dreams of a dead German engineer to keep his men alive. Sir, Willis said. How did you know? Hartley looked at his sergeant, at the trust in the man's eyes, and wanted to tell him the truth. Wanted to explain about Zimmermann, about Pemberton, about the modified compass and the hidden code. But operational security was absolute. If Hartley was captured, if he was interrogated, the Germans couldn't learn that their minefield patterns had been compromised. Couldn't know that one sick engineer had betrayed secrets that would cost them hundreds of lives. Terrain reading, Hartley said. Experience. Luck. Willis didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. What's next, sir? Hartley pulled out the compass, checking the bearing toward the next objective, a road junction 2 kilometers inland. Between here and there, more minefields, more patterns, more gambles. We keep moving, Hartley said. And we keep trusting the compass. What he didn't say, and we hope Klaus Zimmermann was lucid enough, honest enough, detailed enough to keep us all alive. The road junction sat at the intersection of 2 farm lanes, unremarkable except for its strategic value. Control the junction, and you controlled vehicle movement across this entire sector. Lose the junction, and the advance stalled. Hartley's squad reached the crossroads at 0947 hours, 3 hours after landing. They'd cleared 2 more minefield corridors, found 37 mines, and lost no one. Battalion headquarters was calling it a miracle. Other engineer units were reporting casualty rates of 30%. Hartley's unit, 0. But Hartley could feel it, the weight of that luck, pressing down on him like the sky before a storm. The crossroads was different. He could see it immediately in the terrain, in the way the Germans had prepared this position. The hedgerows here formed a natural bottleneck, funneling traffic through a single intersection. Shell craters from Allied naval bombardment pocked the fields on either side, but the roads themselves were intact. The Germans had built them to last, and they'd protected them carefully. Too carefully. Hartley stood at the southern approach, compass in hand, and felt the wrongness of the place settle in his gut. According to the blueprint, this should be another northeast sector, standard anti-personnel patterns, predictable placement. But looking at the terrain, at the strategic importance of this intersection, Hartley knew the Germans would have done something different here. Something special. "Sir," Willis said. "What's wrong?" "It's too quiet," Hartley said. "And too important." He was right about the quiet. There'd been no artillery for the past hour, no machine gun fire, no resistance at all. The German defenders had pulled back without a fight. That wasn't normal. The Wehrmacht didn't abandon strategic positions easily, unless they'd left something behind. Hartley moved forward slowly, studying the intersection. The roads were hard-packed dirt, worn smooth by years of farm traffic and, more recently, by German military vehicles. No visible disturbance. No telltale signs of digging. But the detector in Patterson's hands was going crazy. "Sir, I'm picking up metal everywhere," Patterson said, his voice tight with tension. "It's like the whole intersection is one big mine." Hartley knelt at the road's edge, ran his fingers through the dirt. It was loose, recently disturbed. He pulled his combat knife, probed carefully into the soil. 3 inches down, the knife hit something hard. He brushed away dirt, revealing metal, painted the same color as the road surface. A teller mine. But not buried like a normal teller mine, not positioned to catch the weight of a vehicle. This one was different. The pressure plate had been modified, the trigger sensitivity increased. "Christ," Willis breathed. "They've turned anti-tank mines into anti-personnel mines." Hartley sat back on his heels, his mind racing. The Germans had flooded the entire intersection with modified teller mines, buried just beneath the surface, triggered to explode under the weight of a man. 170 pounds, not 200. A whole intersection turned into one massive explosive trap. But that wasn't what made Hartley's blood run cold. It was the pattern. This wasn't in Zimmerman's blueprint. This wasn't a standard minefield pattern. This was something else, something improvised, something desperate. Which meant the blueprint might be wrong. Which meant every step he'd taken based on Zimmerman's information might have been pure luck. "We need to rethink this," Hartley said quietly. "Sir," Willis said. Before Hartley could answer, the radio crackled. "Engineer 6, this is Battalion. What's your status at the crossroads?" Hartley took the radio handset from the operator. "Battalion, this is Engineer 6. The junction is heavily mined. We need time to—" "Negative, Engineer 6. Armor is stacked up 300 meters behind you. We need that junction clear in 30 minutes. Repeat, 30 minutes. Battalion out. 30 minutes." Hartley stared at the intersection, at the innocent-looking dirt that hid enough explosives to turn a company of men into pink mist. 30 minutes to clear what should take hours, maybe days. He pulled out the modified compass, held it level, watched the needle settle. The notches along the bezel stared back at him. 37, 82, 143, 209, 318. Numbers that had kept them alive so far. Numbers based on the testimony of a dying German engineer. But Klaus Zimmermann had never seen this intersection. Had never laid these mines. Had been captured in Italy, not France. His information was general patterns, not specific positions. Hartley was on his own. "Sir," Willis said, "what are we going to do?" Hartley looked at his sergeant, at the 22 other engineers waiting for orders, at the young faces, Patterson, Hayes, all of them, trusting him to get them through this. He thought about the blueprint, about patterns and probabilities. He thought about Pemberton's words in that rainy briefing room. The Germans are methodical. Even when they improvise, they follow rules. The Germans had modified the teller mines. But they still needed to move through this intersection themselves. They still needed a way to evacuate, to resupply, to withdraw without triggering their own trap. There would be a path. There had to be a path. Hartley stood, moved to the center of the intersection, and began pacing it out. The crossroads formed a rough X, each road about 4 meters wide. Total area: maybe 60 square meters. If the Germans had mined the entire area. No, wait. He knelt again, this time at the exact center of the intersection, where the two roads crossed. He probed with his knife. 3 inches down, 4 inches, 5, nothing. Just hard-packed earth. Patterson, bring the detector here. Patterson moved carefully to Hartley's position, swung the detector in a slow arc. Nothing, sir. No metal. Hartley sat back, thinking. The center of the intersection was clear, but the approaches were mined, which meant the Germans had created a safe zone in the middle, a place where their own vehicles could pause, could make the turn, without risk. Willis, get me some rope. And bring me the 2 smallest men we've got. Willis's eyes widened. Sir, you're not thinking. We rope up. We move from the center outward. If someone hits a mine, the rope pulls them clear before it detonates. Teller mines have a half-second delay between pressure and explosion. Half a second to pull a man to safety. That's insane, sir. That's the job, Sergeant. They rigged the rope system in 10 minutes. 3 men tied together at 3-meter intervals, with Willis and 4 others holding the loose end like a lifeline. Hartley would go first, Patterson second, Hayes third. They'd probe every inch of the intersection, marking safe zones with white tape, mapping the death trap 1 step at a time. If I go down, Hartley said to Willis, you pull. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just pull. Yes, sir, Willis said, his voice thick. Hartley stepped onto the intersection, the rope taut around his waist. The center was safe. The detector had confirmed it. But from here, every direction was unknown. He checked the compass, tried to think like a German engineer. Where would the safe path be? The most obvious route would be straight through, north to south, or east to west. But obvious was deadly in mine warfare. The Germans would expect attackers to take the obvious path. So Hartley turned to a bearing of 143 degrees, one of the blueprint's markers, a northeast sector indicator. It might mean nothing here. Or it might mean everything. He probed with his knife. Clear. Step. Probe. Clear. Step. Behind him, Patterson followed, planting white tape to mark the safe ground. Hayes came last, detector sweeping. 3 meters. 6. 9. They were halfway across the northern approach when Patterson's foot slipped. The young engineer's boot came down hard on disturbed earth, and there was that sound, that soft mechanical click that Hartley had heard before, that every engineer dreaded. But this time it was different. This wasn't an S-mine. This was a Teller mine, modified to detonate under lower pressure. And Teller mines didn't have a pressure hold feature. They were designed to explode immediately when the trigger was released, which meant Patterson was already dead. The explosion would happen in half a second. Hartley didn't think. He lunged backward, grabbed Patterson's webbing, and threw himself to the side. Willis and the others pulled the rope. Patterson came off the mine plate, his boots leaving the ground. The Teller mine detonated. 10 kilograms of TNT and explosive went off in a confined space, the blast wave expanding at 7,000 meters per second. The shock wave hit Hartley like a physical blow, lifting him off his feet, slamming him into Patterson. He felt heat, heard nothing. The explosion was so loud it went beyond sound into pure pressure. He hit the ground hard, couldn't breathe, couldn't hear. His vision was white, then gray, then slowly, painfully, returning. Patterson was lying beside him, still moving, still alive. The rope had pulled them just far enough, 3 meters, maybe 4, to survive the blast. Hartley's ears were ringing. a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. He pushed himself up, checked his body for wounds. Burns on his hands and face, but nothing major. Patterson was bleeding from the nose, dazed but conscious. Willis was shouting something, but Hartley couldn't hear. He looked back at the intersection. There was a crater now where Patterson had stepped, maybe 2 meters across, the earth torn and scorched. And around the crater, clearly visible now in the disturbed earth, was the pattern. The mine pattern. The Germans had laid the teller mines in concentric rings around the central safe zone, creating a death trap that would catch anyone trying to clear from the outside in. But Hartley had been going from the inside out. And now he could see the gaps, the spaces between the rings where no mines had been laid. The Germans' own escape routes, hidden in the geometry of the trap. Hartley's hearing was starting to return, the ringing fading to a dull roar. He could hear Willis now. "Get back! Sir, fall back!" But Hartley wasn't falling back. He was seeing the pattern. Finally, truly seeing it. Not from the blueprint. Not from Zimmermann's testimony. But from the Germans' own logic, revealed in the crater's aftermath. He pointed to the northeast, to a narrow strip between the blast crater and the edge of the intersection. "There!" he shouted, not sure if his voice was working properly. "That's the path. Mark it."